She shivered against the weight of the wind as he moved slowly through the snow-laden forest, each step measured so as not to jostle her fragile body. Her head rested lightly against his arm, ears flicking toward distant murmurs of the woods, the rustle of a hair, the snap of a brittle branch, the far-off cry of a crow. Each sound seemed to both startle and reassure her, a reminder that the world still turned beyond the clearing where she had nearly surrendered. He adjusted his hold, careful to keep her twisted legs supported, feeling the stiffness in her muscles, the slight tremor that spoke of exhaustion and shock. Her amber eyes opened briefly, scanning the path ahead with the faintest flicker of awareness, before closing again in resignation. Snowflakes drifted past in quiet spirals, settling on her fur, melting slowly against the warmth of his coat. The forest was vast and indifferent, yet here in this small frozen space, their fates had converged. The man's mind ran through what he knew. Wolves could endure hardship silently, and pain often made them wary of any human. He spoke softly again, low and unhurried, almost as if sharing the words with the trees themselves. "We'll get you out of this," he murmured. The wolf's tail twitched once, a subtle acknowledgement that she had heard, though she made no other sign. Her breathing was shallow, punctuated by occasional tremors that spoke of hunger and frostbite. The air was brittle, yet the moment carried a quiet intimacy, a fragile bond formed without expectation or pretense. He felt the pulse of life beneath his hands, steady but faint, and each step toward the small cabin he had prepared for emergencies demanded patience, both theirs. At the edge of a gentle rise, the snow gave way to patches of ice, and he slowed, adjusting his balance to shield her from any jarring movements. She shifted slightly, pressing her side closer against his chest, a motion that seemed less about comfort than necessity, a way to conserve the small reserves of strength she had left. He noticed the faint twitch of her ears, listening intently to sounds that humans could not discern. Her muzzle lifted once, sniffing the crisp air, then lowered again, eyes half closed in tentative trust. Around them, the pines bent in the wind, their needles scattering like delicate rain, and the distant mountains caught the first light of a pale sun, glinting against frozen ridges. The forest seemed to breathe with them, expansive yet intimate, holding their passage in hushed reverence. He paused beside a fallen tree, setting her down just long enough to examine the wrapped leg again. The swelling was severe, but there was no open wound beyond the snare marks, a small mercy. He whispered, "Almost there," feeling her muscles tense briefly beneath his hands, then relax. Her head dipped to the snow again, eyes half-lidded, as though acknowledging that the momentary discomfort would not lead to harm. The frost clung to her fur in delicate crystals, highlighting the subtle rise and fall of her ribcage, each breath a testament to survival. Around them, the forest held its usual rhythm, a squirrel leaping between branches, the soft patter of distant snow, a raven circling lazily overhead, yet the presence of life so close, so fragile, made the ordinary seem extraordinary. By the time they reached the small clearing where he could safely transfer her to the makeshift sled, the wolf's body had relaxed into a careful stillness, as if measuring the world anew. He worked deliberately, positioning her gently, supporting her weight, ensuring her injured leg was cushioned. She remained motionless, save for the faint rise of her chest and the occasional flick of an ear toward the forest sounds. The sled began to move slowly, carrying her across snow that glinted with the sun's first warmth. Each push forward was quiet, reverent, as if they were moving not just through space but toward a promise of healing. For the wolf, the journey was silent except for the whisper of her own breathing, the subtle shift of muscles adjusting to the sled, the occasional glance at the forest receding behind her. The man's voice was a soft undertone, steady, unhurried, a tether to safety and patience. By the time they reached the small cabin nestled beneath pine boughs, the world had shifted, the harsh bite of winter softened by sunlight on snow, shadows stretching longer, the wind carrying the faint scent of earth and pine. She was lowered gently to the cabin floor, settling with her head resting lightly on folded cloth, eyes closing again in cautious reprieve. Outside, the wind stirred the needles of the pines, the soft sound mingling with distant echoes of wildlife. And somewhere just beyond the cabin, the forest held its breath, a witness to survival, resilience, and the quiet bond that had formed without words, leaving the clearing behind but never truly untouched. The cabin settled into a quiet rhythm, the only movement the occasional flicker of the stove's flame and the soft rise and fall of her chest. She lay curled lightly on the blankets, eyes half-lidded, muscles still tense but easing as the warmth seeped into her limbs. Outside, snow continued to fall in lazy spirals, brushing against the window panes, while inside the air held the mingled scent of pine, smoke, and the faint musk of fir. The man moved with careful deliberation, each gesture slow, deliberate, as though the wolf's fragile trust could shatter with the smallest misstep. He approached her with a damp cloth and a small bowl, speaking only once softly, "It's all right," and paused, giving her the choice to engage. She lifted her head just enough to catch the scent of water, then lowered it again, observing, calculating, letting instinct guide her. Minutes passed before she crept forward, paws sliding lightly across the worn blankets, nose twitching, amber eyes glimmering with a cautious curiosity. Each sip was tentative, deliberate, the sound of lapping water filling the space with a gentle reassurance. Her breath mingled with the faint warmth of the stove, and for the first time she allowed herself a moment of stillness beyond pain and exhaustion. The man watched silently, hands folded, resisting any urge to move too quickly. When he finally knelt beside her, preparing to tend the swollen leg, she stiffened, ears flicking back in a muted warning. His fingers traced lightly through her fur, applying antiseptic to the wound. The sting caused her to flinch, a small tremor along her spine, but she did not lash out. His whisper, low and steady, "You're stronger than you look," brushed against the tension, a sound that carried no expectation, only calm acknowledgement. As the night deepened, the cabin seemed to shrink around them, enclosing the pair in a fragile cocoon. She remained alert, ears pivoting toward every creak and crack of the cabin's timber, eyes following his movements, chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Yet the sharp edges of fear began to dull. The tight curl of her body softened slightly, the tail no longer tucked entirely beneath her. The stove hissed and popped, sending the scent of cedar and ash curling toward the ceiling, wrapping the room in warmth that even the frost at the windows could not penetrate. He adjusted the blankets around her, careful to keep the injured leg cushioned, his touch light, almost reverent. Each movement was a silent negotiation, a promise of safety without words. By the first light of dawn, a subtle shift had taken place. The snow outside lay thick and silent, blanketing the forest in quiet, while inside she no longer stiffened at his approach. Her head remained lowered, eyes following the motion of his hands rather than his form. There was caution, yes, a measured hesitation, but no growl, no snapping, only the recognition of intention. Trust had not arrived in full, but a fragile understanding lingered in the space between them. The line between fear and acceptance was drawn, delicate and tenuous, yet it existed. He straightened slowly, giving her room to breathe, and she closed her eyes for a moment, the tension in her shoulders easing just enough to hint at rest. Outside, the wind moved the branches gently, brushing snow against the cabin walls. Inside, warmth, quiet, and the tentative bond between human and wild creature held, fragile but undeniable. The cabin carried a subdued energy, punctuated by the soft steps of the rehabilitators and the measured rhythm of their work. They moved with quiet authority, examining the wolf's fractured leg with care that seemed to honor her strength rather than diminish it. Each touch was deliberate, each adjustment to the temporary splint made with a reverence for the life it held. Sedation had dulled her pain just enough for the procedures, leaving her eyes sharp, amber orbs flicking toward every movement, assessing, measuring, remembering. The man stood nearby, hands folded, watching the team work with practiced patience. When one whispered, "She's lucky," he felt the weight of the word. Luck here was fragile, delicate, tethered to survival and careful hands. As the team packed their supplies and left instructions for care and medication, the cabin seemed to exhale, leaving only the steady warmth of the stove, the scent of pine, and the muted sound of her breathing. Days settled into a quiet rhythm, each one measured in small gestures and subtle victories. Food appeared at her bedding in modest portions, water refreshed, bandages changed. The man moved slowly through the space, aware of her boundaries, never imposing, never forcing. She remained cautious, tail low, ears flattened at each approach, muscles tensed for escape. Yet, gradually she allowed herself less distance, retreating less frequently, turning only her eyes toward him rather than her whole body. Each small glance, each hesitant shift of her stance, was a negotiation of trust. By the end of the first week, she stood on 3 legs, the 4th supported by the splint. Trembling ran through her body with the effort, but she did not falter, holding his gaze in a silent acknowledgement that neither demanded reward nor questioned intent. The snow outside softened under the sun, melting into streams and puddles, and the air carried the scent of damp earth, a quiet promise of spring in contrast to the harsh cold that had brought her here. He kept his presence minimal yet constant. He would refresh her water, clear dishes, adjust blankets, each motion deliberate, unhurried, measured to respect her space. One evening as he knelt beside her, she made a low, rolling exhale, not a growl, not a warning, just sound born of comfort, curiosity, and still cautious trust. He paused, letting the silence linger before whispering, "It's all right." Her ears, once flattened at any approach, remained neutral this time. She did not step away. She did not shift her body defensively. She simply observed, and in that observation, a fragile recognition began to emerge. Recognition of safety, consistency, and the presence of someone who would not harm her. Her movements were still careful, deliberate. She never sought touch, never invited proximity beyond the space she claimed. Yet, when he entered the room, she no longer tensed as she had in the early days. Small signs appeared in quiet gestures. A subtle lift of her head, a tail that twitched but remained relaxed, a soft sniff toward his hand before retreating. Nothing dramatic, nothing insistent, only the steady progression of a creature learning that fear could coexist with tolerance, and that patience would not betray her. Healing unfolded in measured steps, both physical and emotional, and in each one, the distance between them narrowed, just enough to hint at understanding without breaking the wildness she carried. In the calm of the cabin, he felt the weight of what was to come. She was healing, yes, but soon she would leave. The thought was never pressing, never urgent, only quietly looming. For now, each day passed in small triumphs. A sip of water taken without hesitation, a paw extended to test the ground, a moment of stillness shared between them without tension. She was strong, fragile, cautious, and alive, and in her careful observation of him, he glimpsed something deeper, the recognition that had grown quietly through the nights, the frost, and the gentle tending hands. Outside, the snow receded further, leaving the scent of wet soil and the promise of movement in the forest. Inside, the cabin held warmth, quiet, and the fragile unfolding of trust, a bond unspoken but undeniable, marking the slow, steady path from fear toward acceptance. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of earth and pine as the man followed the wildlife team toward the enclosure at the forest's edge. Weeks of careful tending had led to this quiet moment. Her leg was strong enough now that the splint could be removed. She moved with a slight, controlled limp, each step steady, deliberate, as if measuring her strength against the promise of freedom. The enclosure itself was modest, a transitional space between human care and the untamed forest beyond. The trees rose like silent guardians, shadows stretching across the snow-melted ground, and the distant call of birds hinted at life unbound by captivity. The transport crate was set in the clearing, doors locked and secured, a threshold between two worlds. The man crouched beside it, careful to remain still, watching her through the crate bars. She rose slowly, muscles flexing beneath her gray coat, ears twitching to catch every sound. The team moved around methodically, ensuring the opening would be safe, every motion precise, calm. The latch lifted, metal scraping softly. The door swung open, revealing the vast expanse of forest beyond, sunlight catching on branches, soil moist with spring thaw. For a long, suspended moment she did not move. Nose lifted, head turning, scenting the wind, tasting distance, calculating. What? Damp soil. Something unseen, calling. Then she stepped forward, one paw after another, slow, cautious, but purposeful. She cleared the crate's threshold and paused in the clearing, letting her senses drink in the open space. The team remained frozen, hands lowered, breaths held, giving her the freedom to choose her path. Every instinct told them she would disappear into the trees immediately. Every expectation had been shaped by the rhythm of countless releases before this one. Yet she moved only a few yards, then stopped, the forest holding its breath with her. Her body turned, deliberate, measured, and her amber eyes found the man's. There was no snarl, no nervous twitch, no submission, only stillness, quiet and deep. The wind brushed through her coat, lifting a few strands, carrying the faint musk of wildness and months of human care. Seconds stretched, heavy with unspoken understanding. In that gaze, a fragile recognition passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the time spent together, of patience and persistence, of respect earned and granted. Then she lifted her head, tilting it slightly, and released a single low howl. It was soft, yet it resonated, carrying across the clearing like a thread woven from something ancient and deliberate. It was not mournful, it was not a call for help. It was a statement, a punctuation in the quiet of the forest, a note of connection, of memory, and of farewell. The sound settled into the trees, lingering briefly, then fading, leaving the clearing empty but charged with presence. She paused just long enough to let the wind and the scent of the forest wash over her, then turned fully, slipping into the shadows of the trees. Branches shifted around her, leaves and needles stirring in her passage. She moved with the fluidity of the wild, effortless, precise, disappearing from sight but leaving an impression that would remain. The man remained where he stood, shoulders easing, eyes following the retreating form, a quiet exhale escaping him. The team stepped back as well, giving the forest back to her entirely. In that instant, the wolf became fully herself again, free, wary, alive. Yet the echo of her presence lingered, a reminder that trust could survive, even when paths diverged. Gone yet unforgettable. The cabin felt still in a way it had never known while she was there. Blankets lay neatly folded where she had slept, the faint warmth of the stove lingering in the air, but the scent of fur, of life pressed close, had faded into the crisp smell of wood smoke. Silence wrapped the room like a soft blanket, ordinary yet heavy with absence. Days passed, measured by the slow creak of timber floors, the occasional rustle of wildlife beyond the walls, the muted tick of hours moving forward without interruption. The routine was quiet, unremarkable, yet threaded with the memory of her presence, a subtle weight beneath the calm. Then one evening the horizon glowed in muted gold, sunlight slipping between trees, shadows stretching long and soft across the snow-dusted earth. The man was outside, tending to simple chores, when a sound rose through the forest, threading between branches and hills. A howl, low at first, then rolling and full, resonating with the strength of a creature fully returned to itself. It did not speak of fear, of pain, or of longing. It spoke instead of freedom, movement, and life lived on instinct and choice. The man paused, hands resting lightly in his pockets, eyes scanning the darkening treeline, yet he did not call back. There was no need. The sound carried everything necessary, a message sent across distance, unbroken by walls or time. He listened as the howl echoed through the hills, bending over ridges, drifting into valleys, brushing past branches as if the forest itself had learned to carry it. Somewhere out there she ran again, tracking prey, following scents, moving through spaces she had always belonged to, reclaiming a world that had been hers long before human care touched her life. He felt a quiet swell of something tender, a recognition that the bond they had shared did not require his voice to persist. It had been built slowly, in measured touch, in restraint, in allowing her to choose when and how to trust. No leash, no claim, no expectation, only patience and the delicate thread of mutual endurance. The forest absorbed the final echo, leaving behind only stillness and the faint rustle of wind through pine needles. The man remained where he stood, shoulders easing, breath slow and steady. The sound, though distant now, lingered in his mind like an unspoken promise. Compassion, he understood, does not always leave visible marks. Sometimes it manifests in absence, in quiet remembrance, in the knowledge that life continues beyond what one can see or touch. The howl had carried more than sound. It carried memory, acknowledgement, and the subtle proof of connection forged in hardship. Turning back toward the cabin, he felt the weight of that understanding settle quietly into him. Inside, the familiar rhythm awaited, the crackle of the stove, the scent of wood, the slow passage of hours, yet something invisible had shifted. A small, enduring presence lingered, tucked within the spaces between walls, between breaths, between the quiet calls of the forest. He stepped inside without haste, letting the silence fill him, carrying with him the awareness that some bonds do not need proximity, only respect, patience, and the enduring grace of trust. And in the fading light, beneath the sweep of an evening sky, he held that memory, as steady and clear as the distant howl, and allowed it to remain, gentle, unclaimed, unforgettable.